All right, thank you. Yeah, just to give a little bit more context, one of my kind of core motivations in transitioning from engineering to the social science is what I study now. I kind of realized during my undergrad that there was probably not surprising for those taking course 10, but course 10 is kind of big and scary and daunting, and not everyone continues on with course 10. And as I transitioned away, I was always motivated to understand the social side of innovation, the team dynamics related to how teams collaborate to come up with these ideas and implement them. And also, just because you have a good idea and just because you get it out there doesn't mean it's always going to be successful. Today, I tried to incorporate as much as I could. I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on the creation side, the creation of these radical innovations, for a few reasons. First, I have more, actually have a research study in that area that I've completed, so I can pub my own research. And then the second is I know that area a lot better, and I'm moving into the other side with future research. So I do know a little bit more. I can answer questions at the end, and I'll talk a little bit more about examples of innovations that didn't succeed. So you'll get, if you came here for that, sorry it's not more focused on that, but you will get some of that today. And then feel free to ask me any questions at the end or follow up with me. This is my email up here. I'd be happy to take any random emails, even if I don't talk to you today. So now to the topic. Why your brilliant idea might fail, demystifying the social side of innovation. How many people currently have a brilliant idea? And how many people want to have a brilliant, or think they're going to have a brilliant idea, or want to work on a brilliant idea in the future? Okay. You came to the right place. So today I have one kind of core point at the end of the day that I want you to walk away with, and that point is that at MIT I remember being trained to focus, and I think just culturally we're trained to focus on the tangible things that you can touch, feel, measure. That comes through in our work with actual engineering problems. It also comes through in just the way we think about things. For example, if you get solicited by an HBS MBA student and saying, hey, I really got this great idea, I need somebody technical to work on it. I imagine a lot of people won't be jumping at the idea to work on it because they probably think it's infeasible. They think it's just going to be a lot of fluff, or any number of reasons why you might reject the fluffy marketing speech and just say, okay, does the thing work or not? So I think there's this tendency for us to focus on the tangible aspects, but there's this other dimension of the world, this intangible aspect that I want you to, that's the idea that I want you to then start looking at, adding a new perspective to start looking at the world. And so I'll go through it on how I am constructing research around this, and at the end I'll have like this visual that hopefully like kind of brings it all home. So MIT, you've probably heard of these brilliant ideas that were once just ideas, and now they're something much greater. Obviously there's Dropbox, which started in around 2006 when I was an undergrad here. So Dropbox was not a thing. We were still transferring files the old-fashioned way through email. And Drew Houston, he was actually a brother of my house, Fidel's, and he sent an email out saying, hey, I got this new product. We're in beta. Anybody who wants to give it a try can sign up for 10 free gigabytes. So I did, really liked it, and it's been really amazing, like kind of mind-blowing to see how it's just exploded over the years. And then you have Khan Academy, which is another amazing idea. And it started with just a simple tutoring session between one family member to another. And he was good at it, and it became something more. And now they're rivaling edX, and in some ways they're the face of this new wave of education that has a lot of places like MIT and HBS kind of scared that they're going to become irrelevant. So again, MIT grad, amazing idea, and it's been really successful. Bose is another example, a little more old school example of an MIT alum who has just very smart, very good ideas, and constantly making good products. I think one of my favorite ones is the noise-canceling headphones. I think the technology behind that is just super cool, where you invert the waves and cancel any white noise coming in by sending a wave with the opposite frequency. So again, lots of brilliant ideas from MIT. These ones a little bit more well-known. Some ones that maybe not so well-known. These were started when I was, again, these were, what I remember, were just ideas at the time when I was an undergrad, and now have become a little bit more. This is a company started by a guy named Shaquille Avedani. He's a classmate of mine. It's called Levant Power. And what they do is they modify existing shock systems on cars to make it a smoother ride. And the way they do that is they have this little mechanism that can absorb energy and then generate energy and release energy, and that helps stabilize the shocks in real time. And so they have they hook it up with computer systems, electronics, the whole thing. Very clever design, and from what I understand, they're doing quite well. They're not quite the level of Dropbox, but maybe not yet. Another really cool example, I think this was at the MIT Lemelson Ideas Competition. There's just a few. I forget which one I was at, but one of the contestants was this guy named Nate Ball, and he came out. Actually, he didn't come out onto the stage. He dropped in from the ceiling onto the stage with this the Atlas Ascender. So at the time, it wasn't the Atlas Ascender. It was just his really cool innovation where he could press a button and zoom up and down this rope. I have a little video just to give you a sense of what it is. Oh, wrong way.
One of those devices is the Atlas-powered rope ascender, used by the U.S. Army.
The Atlas is really similar in a lot of ways to what...
I want to apologize for the cheesy Batman references that might come in. It's the best video I could find. But
Batman's right out of the comic book or the movies. The system is designed to pull a very large load up a rope extremely quickly. It's great for rapid escape, search and rescue, all sorts of things that Batman's actually done.
The Atlas also lets its user do a controlled descent down the side of a building or a mountain. And its mechanism is relatively simple.
It's a lot like a capstan winch on a sailboat. And the capstan basically gives you a very strong circumferential grip around something round when you apply a load to the rope. To engage the rope, you simply wrap it around that capstan winch mechanism in the device, close the lid, and pull the trigger. To operate it, it's like a portable drill, variable speed trigger. You pull the trigger more, you're going to go up faster.
Built for combat search and rescue and other vertical tactical operations, the Atlas can swiftly lift over 500 pounds. So just like Batman's grappling system, carrying two people isn't a problem.
Okay. They just go back into Batman after that. Okay. So those literally were just two ideas that classmates that I had here, and they were just ideas at the time. Several years later, now they're like real successful products and companies. And so I think like one of the coolest things that I think about going to a school like MIT is that you do have these ideas that can become these, to varying levels, just changing the world in very real and important ways. And I think that's just like a really cool thing about innovation in general is you can be just a kid at a school and you don't need to be 3M or Procter & Gamble or IBM or Microsoft. You don't need to have the name recognition to succeed. And I think that's just like an amazing thing about innovation in general. So yeah, enough of the hurrah hurrah. Now I'm going to bring you down and tell you that not all brilliant ideas are successful. So you do have brilliant ideas. These guys had brilliant ideas, and they could have failed. And there's many reasons why they could fail. And a lot of them are kind of hidden, unknown reasons. You think you have a great idea, and it's very easy to envision and imagine all the lives you're going to change and all the money you're going to make and all the fame you're going to get. However, there are many ideas which had similar aspirations and actually not only had the idea, but built it and implemented it and tried to sell it, got all to the point where they were selling it, and they still weren't successful. This is a very old example. I apologize if no one knows what these two even are anymore. But this is the 1980s. There was this huge battle between Betamax and VHS. And everyone knows probably what VHS is. Most people here probably know what Betamax was. The peculiar thing about this is that, okay, people know that Betamax was the better quality. Maybe you can't tell with the VGA connection, but you can see the color is just a little bit dimmer. The definition is still crappy because it's the 80s technology, but not as good as Betamax. So this product was better. Not only was the product better, but all the things they tell in economics of you want to be the first mover. Betamax was the first one to develop the technology. They were the first ones to get out to market. And even then, VHS still beat them in the end. And there's a very famous research study on this. The reason why is because VHS had better access to distribution networks. It was really that simple. They were able to move their product to market quicker. It wasn't about marketing. It wasn't about any other kind of fuzzy, non-significant reason. Is because they had access to the distribution networks to get their product to market faster. And then once people had a VHS, they had no reason to buy Betamax, so Betamax didn't make it. Another example that you may or may not be familiar with, the Apple Newton was introduced in 1993 and was really like an amazing invention. Like, people think of Apple and all their incredible inventions in the 2000s, but this one is most people consider to be their most radical and most breakthrough innovation that they ever came up with. Maybe other than like the original personal computer, but this thing it had optical character recognition by 2000, and we still don't have that today. And there's videos online you can see of people writing out the words just in their regular handwriting, and it in real time converting it into text, very amazing. The problem is that it was too radical, and it wasn't until 2007 when something like the Newton was more acceptable and more marketable and just easier to use. So, brilliant ideas can be maybe ahead of their time, and there's lots of examples of this. Electric vehicles in the 90s also suffered from a similar problem. We've had the technology for a long time, but it wasn't until 15 or 20 years later where the rest of the system was ready to embrace it. Is there a question? Yeah.
When you say incompatible, is that mostly because most people can't grapple the idea, or because technology for some reason makes it clunky in ways that, is it like a product problem, or is it like a perception problem?
I'm sure it's a combination of the two. I haven't done research on that question specifically, but I've collected some data around that question of, is it just too new? Is it too much of a leap for people to use, or is there something about the product itself? I'm sure it's a combination of the two. Obviously, the Newton does not function the way that the iPhone did. But even if you think back to the original iPhone, the technology for the data communication was pretty atrocious. It took forever to load a page. By today's standards, the original iPhone was fairly clunky in the way that it worked. So I don't know. It's a good question, but it's something I'll probably be looking to in the future. Back to our Bose, a very innovative company, lots of very successful technologies. This is one. Have many people heard of this one? Okay, not many. Yeah, interesting. This was actually very popular when I was in undergrad here. It's like everyone was saying this technology is amazing. It was taking the same concept from noise-canceling headphones and applying it to shock systems in cars. So shocks, cars going over the road, they're constantly vibrating like this. The idea behind this is that it was going to sense those movements and then counteract it with opposing forces to make an overall smoother ride. That was the idea. They built it. 20 years of research went into it, and this was kind of like a prototype of how it was going to fit on actual cars. And they implemented it on cars, but it never really took off. And the reason why is because it took a ton of power to use. It took these systems drew from the battery a third of what the air conditioning unit drew from or took. They were very heavy, and they had a weight limit that they could exceed, because the more weight you add to a car, the less effective your fuel efficiency is. And then the cost was just super high. Their competitors on the high end were at $2,500 per wheel. Add that over 4 wheels, you have $10,000 for a shock system on cars that are $50,000 to $100,000. So that's just cost. I mean, so lots of reasons why this particular idea did not succeed. And even if you just, so I did a little comparison with Levant technology. Just looking at the two schematics, like look how bulky this stuff is compared to that. And you can just kind of sense that there's too much going on for this to be actually feasible and successful. Where Levant seems to have figured out a lot of those issues and did it in a much more clever way. So kind of an example of where one very successful, well-known company, very well-respected from a technical standpoint even, was trying to succeed, didn't succeed, and you have a new company actually being more successful. Last example is the going back another generation again. I'm catching your attention even though I'm not talking about apps just yet. I will, don't worry. So Polaroid and Kodak. Everyone knows we used to take pictures with film, and now we do it digitally. And a lot of people know that Kodak went bankrupt twice. Polaroid is no longer in business. And they think, oh, this is just the typical story where the big companies that did it the old way lost out to the new companies doing it the new way. It's a very common story, and people think that that's just what happened here. In reality, Kodak and Polaroid were developing patents around digital technology in the late 70s and all throughout the 80s. And Kodak was the leader of patent technology around digital cameras. So much so that they were actually the first ones to introduce a digital camera in 1991. This is the first prototype, first ever digital camera that was ever sold. You might think, okay, well, they actually got to market first. Why did they fail? They failed. So Kodak failed because they saw themselves as a film business. They didn't see themselves as a camera company. They saw themselves as a film company, meaning that they sold cameras to make money on film. It's like the razor blade. You get the razor blade for free, and then you pay for the razors. You get the camera for very low profit. So almost, they're making no money on cameras. They're making all their money on film. They could not release that mindset. The top management company, the top management in the company saw this subunit that was developing digital, but they discounted it and said, that's not gonna make us any money, and two, this digital thing is gonna pass. Obviously we know what happened. Polaroid, on the other hand, they were also developing patents in this technology. And Polaroid, again, they saw themselves as a instant photo business. So, and it was much less about profits. It's not that they made money. They made money on all their products and on the actual papers that were specialized for them. But the founder of Polaroid, his vision was to have instant photography. If you imagine when Polaroid was invented in the 30s or the 20s, whenever it was, the only way you could get photos is, I don't even know how, but it took days to get photos. So he developed this product that could take instant photos, which was like revolutionary. And so the longer that they were successful with that strategy, with that identity, the more enrooted and the more ingrained and the more they believed that the only way to succeed was instant photos. They no longer exist. So they cannot expand enough to become a digital company. Contrast this with Canon and Fujifilm. It's not that digital cameras are going by the wayside, even though iPhones and smartphones are making cameras. Canon's doing very well. Their DSLR camera is still kind of the standard. And Fujifilm, contrasted to Polaroid, they were able to expand their identity, and they didn't consider themselves just as a film company, but they were able to say, oh, we're bigger than that. We're more than just film. We're more than just instant photos, and we're able to incorporate digital technology into their kind of like the way we do things. And so they were able to kind of ride this wave of succession between technologies. So I've told you about lots of examples, companies that succeeded, brilliant ideas that succeeded. Told you about examples, brilliant ideas that failed. The question that you are all wondering is, how can you succeed? What are the lessons that you can learn? Well, there's kind of two core things that my research builds upon that are kind of very well-established facts in the field that if you understand these two things, it gives you a little bit better chance to be successful. The first is that innovation happens through recombination. So what is recombination? Recombination is taking an old Polaroid camera with new technology apps in the App Store and combining it into a photo app that makes things that look like the old technology. This is one example of recombining ideas to create something new and then selling that thing. This isn't just restricted to technology. It also happens in food. So, any bibimbap fans in here? Yeah, I love it. Bibimbap, got the ingredients going on with Korean food. Tacos, boom, Korean tacos. A fairly simple example, but it illustrates the point that this is how innovation happens in all fields. Some more examples of how it's happening with very current technologies and innovation. You have 3D printers taking concept of the old printer with extrusion ink, and instead of ink, you extrude material. And that's where the 3D printer came from. You have, this is a TiVo in the bottom right, which may not be super relevant anymore with streaming, but 5-6 years ago, it was a very current new technology. And what that was is taking VCR, the using of a VCR, and a computer technology that stores information and suggests things and search algorithms, then boom, you have a TiVo. Google search engine itself is a type of recombination. The search engine takes all these, it builds a network of pages and page ranks, and then goes through an algorithm to tell you that whatever thing that you're searching, what are all the different websites that are also pointing to that thing, and whatever points to it the most. I mean, I'm simplifying it in a lot of ways, but that's the thing that you're looking for. And so this is taking ideas from social science, actually, network analysis. People have been studying how networks develop between people, and they're applying it to websites to make sure that people are getting the best search that they're looking for. And then this is another example I think is just kind of funny. And so anytime it's going back to another food example, but now you start to see recombination happening everywhere. And this is just how new things get created.
I feel terrible.
I know how to make you feel better.
So what do you think?
I'm pretty sure that's not how they're made.
Klondike ice cream meets candy bar. The best ice cream bar ever conceived.
So recombination, some simple examples of how it works. Anytime you think of a new technology, just think of all the components making love and having little new product babies. So that's the first thing, is innovation happens through recombination of different things that oftentimes already exist. The second thing important thing is that teams are on the rise. And there's been this isn't the only study, this is a good study showing that on the top, each graph is talking about the mean size, the average size of teams over time. So starting in the 1960s, ending in about 2001, you can see science and engineering, the number of people is increasing very high. Social sciences is increasing, arts and humanities is increasing. These are in academic fields. And then you have patents over here. So this is like actually how it's happening in organizations and how people are developing new technologies. Team size is also getting higher. What the bottom is showing is that not only are teams getting bigger, but the impact, the quality of what they're producing is also higher and better than what individuals produce on their own. And so there's this just growing trend over time that teams are becoming more involved and more important for innovation, and also that teams are being more effective. And this isn't going to blow any of your guys' minds, it's just kind of showing that there's data to back up what we all kind of intuitively think might be going on. So the question now, and this is where my research really focuses on, is how do teams recombine ideas? So you have different components, different ideas, different aspects coming together from different people, recombining them, coming up with something new. Why are some teams good at it, and why are some teams bad at it? Because not all teams are good at it, is the reality of it. So now, I know I've been talking a lot, and there's one guy yawning even, so I'm boring the crowd now. Sorry. No, it's fine. So I'm gonna ask you to get a little bit more involved right now. So I want you to imagine that it's 2006, 2005 even, which might be hard for some, but for me, I was a freshman here, and I was around people with brilliant ideas. And imagine that you're trying to develop the first smartphone. So this is imagine you know what's going to go into the smartphone. You got the speakers, the camera, display touch, your hardware, obviously your software, batteries, enclosure. What kind of people do you need involved? If you have this vision in your mind of what the smartphone is going to be and what it's going to look like, and you know you got these kind of areas, who are you going to get involved?
Product designer, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer.
Okay, so that's three people right off the bat. You need a mechanical engineer, you say
Product
designer, and mechanical engineer, and software engineer. Okay, what else might you need?
Supply chain guy.
Supply chain guy, okay. So that's gonna be for later for the implementation. Imagine you're still in just the early stage. You just have the vision, you need to get a team together right now. So supply chain guy might be necessary maybe after the prototype. What's that?
Marketing, capital.
Yeah. So it's gonna be similar. You're definitely gonna need those guys a little later. Maybe you need one right off the bat just to convince people to give you money to fund you. Yeah, I'm gonna go
someone in charge of the optics, the camera stuff.
optics. Okay, so there's certainly a whole field of physics and applied physics that focus on optical science. Yeah.
Materials guy.
Materials. Yeah. You got batteries in there. Manager. Okay, you need somebody. Okay, we're up to six technical people and 2 or 3 non-technical people. You're gonna see somebody to manage all this. A team facilitator. I'm going to put that with managing. That's kind of like the role the manager does. But certainly there's going to be facilitation going on during the teamwork. Yeah, just one more.
Designer, one that actually designs.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So we got 7, 8, probably more people involved. Now you're a startup. You don't want You don't need multiple people in each of these categories. But you need at least one person in each of these categories. Maybe one guy can span a couple categories, but unlikely. Okay, so you got your team together. What could go wrong?
Don't bad electronics the way that you wanted them to be. So the supply chain guy.
Okay, great. You could have issues with just communication and translating ideas between these members. Is that captured a little bit?
I meant more like you're actually getting like improper parts from China.
Oh, okay, so like literal translation. Yeah, okay, what else?
Sometimes you might have conflicting visions, so you know what you want in it technically, but that doesn't fit in the form factor that is applicable
So you have
socially.
constraints between what these guys want. You have a designer who says, I need it to be no bigger than 4 inches, and that constrains everything else. So you have these interdependencies between ideas. Okay.
You could build something that people don't want.
Yeah, you could just totally miss and just absolutely.
You could have trouble retaining your team members
Trouble with retention. Why might people want to leave?
if you're not making any profit and if it's going to be a long time so you see the product.
Okay. So not making good enough progress quickly enough.
Everyone thinks you're crazy because what's a smartphone?
Because what is, yeah, exactly. What, we don't even have a way of thinking about this phone. We have flip phones. Why isn't that smart? I can text and play games on that. Yeah.
It's really hard.
It might just be really, why might it just be really
It
hard?
might be unexpectedly hard, especially if they have a really small team and have to have lots of responsibilities.
Yeah, so any last comments on this? Yeah.
Someone else kind of do it first, but like do exactly what you're planning on doing before you.
Could somebody else do it? What do you,
So like wouldn't that be another thing if someone else did it first?
if someone else did it first? Yeah, so so maybe in the early stage in 2005, there were certainly other companies already trying to do this too. So yeah, it's competition, right? So that adds pressure to the situation. Okay, so yeah, all these are like fantastic examples. The key takeaways for when you're working in these diverse teams, and this is at least what has been researched in my area, is that bringing diverse members together and recombining their ideas to make something new, it can be very effective, and there's a lot of tangible benefits. So they have different ideas, which you saw getting recombined. They have different and diverse perspectives. This can not only be valuable for generating ideas, but also for evaluating ideas. So say somebody has some ideas about how to design the screen. If you only have physicists or you only have hardware engineers evaluating that question, you might miss the fact that the screen is too big. And so the design guy needs to come in and say, no, we need it smaller. So having the diverse perspectives helps the team evaluate ideas, and the process just helps it be more accurate, be more better. Hopefully avoiding the, I forget who said it, yeah, I think you, where you just develop the thing and by the end nobody wants it. So having more diverse perspectives and looking at it, asking your mom, asking your girlfriend, whatever it is, can improve the quality of the idea over time. And then there's been research that has shown that when ideas conflict with each other, so when you have 2 different engineers focusing on the same problem, interdependence, but then also those ideas can conflict. You could either just ignore the conflict and compromise between the 2 and then come to some middle ground. It's not very innovative. But when you can resolve the conflict and recombine it into something new, that's when more innovation happens. That's when teams can be more successful at innovating. Yeah?
Is there like a method to go about deciding how you can do another team? Or like you're supposed to be like...
Yeah, so we'll actually, I'll have some data later that'll touch on that. So while there's tangible benefits to this diversity in team, there's also these intangible things going on. You have communication issues. People with different backgrounds just have more trouble communicating with each other. And it doesn't have to be like socioeconomic backgrounds. It could just be the fact that you have a marketer or a supply or operations guy just thinks about things differently. They have different vocabularies. They have different ways of talking about things. And it just prevents them from sharing ideas with each other. So again, so that builds on the sharing knowledge. There's been lots of research that has shown that when teams have diverse perspectives and opinions and ideas, there's always going to be some overlap of ideas between those members. And when teams get together and have different ideas, they tend to focus on the ideas that are common and similar. So now you're in a situation where the whole point of having a team there is to take advantage of the diverse perspectives.
but you're only focusing on the knowledge that's common amongst you. So it kind of makes that diversity go to waste. There's diversity on one side brings, again, when you have conflicting ideas and you can resolve it and have different perspectives, that kind of conflict is very good for performance, but too much starts to bleed over into interpersonal conflict, and that's where you have lots of negative things happening with teams where people just don't like each other and they just don't want to work with each other anymore. So that can happen to decrease performance. And finally, you need to balance the breadth and depth. I kind of used an unfair example with a smartphone has, I mean, so many different components that you need such breadth of knowledge, it's going to be very difficult to be successful from the start. And there's lots of research that shows going too broad, too much, makes recombination in teams just much more challenging. At the same time, too much depth, if you have all people from the same background, very deep expertise in one area, their ideas just can't be combined. You have a limited set of ideas to come up with novel things. So your candy bar is never going to make love with your Klondike bar. Okay, so these are kind of the key takeaways for diversity. Now I want you to imagine a situation. You're on a team of engineers. You're having a great time. You're coming up with something new, and you're dancing about it instead of doing work for some reason. Now, there's going to be other kinds of people who have a little bit more distant knowledge. So instead of having your mechanical engineer, your product designer, your electrical engineer, your software engineer, they're related enough. You all maybe went to MIT together. You have some common backgrounds. You can kind of get along well enough, and similar backgrounds where you can communicate and take advantage of your diversity. But then you have this guy over here. I mean, he's from Sloan. He's a Sloanie. He's sitting over there. He's working away on his reports. He's the idea guy of the team. And the engineers, how many people would think to get this guy involved in helping out with the ideas? How many people would not want his help? You can be, yeah, like you wouldn't necessarily, you might ask for him help on marketing stuff, yeah. Are you going to ask him for help on some of the hardcore engineering design issues? Most likely not. Like, what can this guy even contribute is probably what's going to be going through your mind, even though he wants to contribute. So I just finished a study, not exactly engineers, but a similar analogous setup, that when these guys do get involved and they do contribute to the recombination process, they are actually on average 10% more innovative. I saw a guy throw up his hand, like, how is that possible? And so going more into the data, exploring more deeply, like how does these more distant experts, people with knowledge completely unrelated to the thing that matters, how are they helping a team be more innovative? And so we're finding that if you break this arrow down into a longer process, so this is how innovation tends to happen. First you generate ideas, and then once you generate ideas, you select one, and then once you selected it, you implement it. Are there any questions on that process? So what's your opinion on bringing in another person versus extending your personal knowledge base as a team into those areas? Because there's a movement in at least Silicon Valley where, for example, Andreessen Horowitz is like built around this idea that engineers don't need a marketer or a manager, at least like within the first year. And instead what they should be doing is educating themselves on those issues instead of actually bringing on an additional person. So what's your thought on like being able to reconcile the engineering with marketing internally versus bringing on a third person?
That's a great setup to my next point, and then I'll try to come back and answer that more specifically. So when looking at how these guys contribute to the innovation of the area that matters, we're finding that, I should say that the data set we have are not engineers and marketers or managers, but they are lawyers and their clients. And their clients are not lawyers in many of the cases. So lawyers get hired by, they're working in this big law firm, much like a consulting firm. And these organizations are out there doing their thing, and they come to some legal issue, and they need expert help on that issue. So they hire this external law firm who have experts in a particular area of law, and then they have friends in their firm that they can collaborate with who all have different, distinct, but similar legal knowledge. And we're finding that when the client contributes to the process and contributes to the idea, the innovativeness of those ideas increases. And the way we measure the innovativeness is there's this innovation contest in the industry where a third-party firm goes in and evaluates each idea that gets submitted and rates it on how original the idea is, whether it's been done before or not, and how useful the idea is. So is this an idea that's going to be applicable to just a small set of law and organizations or industries, or is it going to transform the way that law is done more broadly? So you can see how that translates to more technical innovation, like new watches or new electronics. Is this going to be something that only affects a small part of the market, or is it going to change the way everything is done? So there's a lot of parallels, and future research, I'm actually trying to develop research now that looks at more technical engineering based. So I should say that you have to counter everything I show you with a question of, well, is this applicable elsewhere? But in law, at least, what we find is that the people who are more distant, in the case of the data set I have, it's the CEOs, CFOs, senior level managers. When these guys get involved, what they do is they contribute to this early stage. They help the team generate lots of ideas. They don't really get involved with selecting and implementing. At least that's not what makes a difference. What makes a difference is when they help the team generate lots of ideas to solve some problem. And the experts have this big, more expansive set of ideas, maybe things that they missed or wouldn't think of, and now they can start evaluating these ideas. And sometimes these ideas are going to, most of the time they're not going to be even possible, remotely possible, and that's fine. Like, the purpose is not for them to give you good ideas, it's for them to give you lots of ideas. And you use your expertise to evaluate and select, and sometimes even work with a little bit more to develop further. Maybe an idea is almost there, it just needs a little bit of that engineering expertise to actually make a reality. And then that's where you select and implement the idea. And that's how you get more innovative. That's how you can take these guys who are the idea guys, or the managers, or people who are completely unrelated to your field. They could be kids. And you just ask them, how do you think that you can make this better? And a lot of times it's going to be crap ideas, but maybe they're going to give you a nugget that you didn't think of that you can then work with, tinker, and then make something better. Yeah?
How do you decide which distant experts to ask? Like, if everyone's out there, who'd be a good person to ask? How do you go about that process? If they're not
in this case, that's a good question. I don't have a full answer to that. In this case, the reason why clients were helpful, I think, is because they were benefiting from the technology. So there's lots of the solution, the legal solution. So they had maybe a little bit more stake, maybe they had a little bit more understanding of what was going to be successful. There's lots of research on user innovation. There's a guy at Sloan, Eric von Hippel, who's done decades of research showing that users, not big companies, are the ones who actually come up with all the innovative ideas. So if you're in some industry, talk to people who would be the first people to use the technology that you're working with, and ask them, what do they think? Like, what do they think it can make better? And the more unrelated they are, the better, I would assume. So you don't want to, if you're developing a new technology that's focused for mechanical engineers, maybe talk to a marketer from that industry, or maybe talk to a CEO from that industry, or somebody with just a different background who's going to think about it differently. I'll take one more and then.
Yeah, similar sort of like tangent along what this topic is about. So there's sort of this chicken and egg problem of whether you start with the idea first and you build a team around the idea. We start with the team first and then come up with an idea that's a good fit for the team. And I was wondering if you had any insight as to which of these approaches kind tends to be more successful?
I think the chicken and the egg is not it sets up like this idea that one has to come first, and it's impossible for the other to come without the other happening first. But in reality, I think you have ideas now, and you're going to talk to some friends about it today or tomorrow, and you're going to iterate. Your idea is constantly going to be like from the moment you start, and during these processes, you're going to start figuring out, okay, who's the team I can start building, and then as you build a team, the idea evolves, and then you talk to more people, the idea evolves, maybe recruitment. So I think it's a lot more highly iterative than the chicken and the egg is. So to show you a little bit more qualitative evidence of that this is actually what was going on, here's some quotes from our data. This is not from a client, but one of the lawyers talking about the clients and the value that they brought. He says, the client would throw up options to us, and we would point out pros and cons. At the end of the process, there were 10 structures on the board, and we had to narrow it down to 2 or 3, but we worked as a team. So this is this is clearly the client had no idea what the actual solutions were going to work, but they just helped the team generate lots of ideas. Like, that's their role. The experts, on the other hand, had a very different role. So this quote, as lawyers, you have to make a judgment call on how far you can push something and where you decide it's not going to work. That's where we add value, helping clients see ahead as to where the pitfalls will be. Sometimes it's about seeing where something won't work and thinking of an alternative approach. So you can easily see how this applies to engineers in the technical field. Engineers are the experts on the science, on the things that are actually going to work feasibly. And you can use that expertise to evaluate these ideas and figure out what's not going to work, what will work. What's not going to work, but how can it be tweaked a little bit so that it can work? And then together, this type of collaboration helps the team broaden its focus, but also implement. Our client knew what they wanted to achieve commercially. You're a bit bounded by thinking legally, but you just have to think about what you want commercially, and then you get there legally. So what this is describing is starting with a different perspective, starting with a different goal, and then using this creative problem-solving process from your expert perspective of thinking, how can I achieve that goal? I think science fiction plays this role in a lot of ways for the way that engineers currently think about what's the next step, what's the future of innovation. Taking these ideas that are totally ludicrous, they're meant to be ludicrous. I mean, science fiction, that's the whole point, is that it's not possible, it's fictional. But sure enough, you see over time, a lot of the things we were writing about decades earlier are coming to reality later on. So this is kind of like a tangible example of how you can maybe speed up that process. So it's not happening over decades, but maybe happening over months or years. Okay, so that's thinking about diversity in teams. I also want to talk about a different aspect of your team composition. So I want you to take so you're no longer making a smartphone. I want you to think of you're in a new situation. You're in a big company. You've been successful for many years, many product designs. You've just been killing it over and over and over again. You've been working with team members. You've been working on the same team for a long time, and you've come up with the next big thing. So if you're in this situation, what's the team that you want to put together to come up with the next big idea? And let me narrow it down a little bit more. Do you want to work with team members that you've been very successful with in the past on these other areas? Or do you want to work with new people altogether? Yeah.
I mean, a blend of both. For execution, you want to work with people who've demonstrated their ability.
Yeah.
But you also want to bring in a fresh perspective.
Okay. And what does a fresh, open it up, what does a fresh perspective bring?
New ideas.
Brings new ideas. And a fresh perspective in what way? Just somebody from a different area of knowledge? Different, like you've been working with your team, but say you want to go into like a completely new area of technology, like 3D printing.
A different perception of what people need. So if you're working on, like if you're making computers, right? you make them for a specific application. Someone from the music industry joins your team, says, let's make an icon.
Okay. Yeah.
Not enough people who have some of the same vocabulary. So it's like, mechanical engineers of the old style, and new mechanical engineers who they can collaborate with, but who also know like new trends or new things which could be with that knowledge.
Yeah. So what these two guys are talking about is one is coming up, talking to somebody new from a different field, bringing the music guy in and changing the way that the world consumes music. That's kind of the same argument of diversity. And what he's saying is that you can work with a mechanical engineer that you've known for a long time, but then you can work with somebody who's also in the same field, who's completely new, and that is another way to generate lots of ideas. So these are like two different ways to think about this. When thinking about the balance between those, like more familiarity, more novelty in who you know, generally what the research has found is that, so generally what the research has found is that you want a team that's moderately familiar, but then introduces a new person. And the reason why is because, so this graph on the right here is on the x-axis is the mean tenure of a project. This is how long a team has been working together, and this is the performance of that team over time. And this is on a new product development, so it's like in innovation context. So you can see early on, teams are moderately effective, but less than 1 year, they're okay. 2-3 years together is when they really start peaking in their performance. However, over time, the longer they work together, all sorts of things start happening that makes them less effective, less innovative. And so the balance that has been struck is this moderately familiar team, so this 2 to 3 year peak, and then introducing new people, and that's how teams get to be most innovative. So the key takeaways, things you mentioned, they bring fresh ideas. More ideas allows you to have more recombinations with existing ideas in the team, and new perspectives, again, gives you a new way to evaluate a solution or a problem. On the interpersonal dynamics, new members, having too much novelty can be a bad thing. There's less trust in the group, so you're less likely to take risks. You're more likely to take things personally if you have a conflicting idea with each other. And on the other side, when you have too much familiarity, you've been working together too long, you start developing what in the field we call habitual routines, meaning you tend to start doing things. You kind of get into a rhythm of, oh, we have meetings on Monday, let's go through the agenda, and let's move on. So you develop this routine of how things are always done, and it's just it's not a good way to generate new ideas. And also, there's this phenomenon where people just start thinking similarly the longer they spend together. There's this saying that says that you are the average of your 5 closest friends. And that kind of I've experienced it myself. You just start thinking similarly to your friends. So collaborating with new members is a really good way to increase innovativeness, but you want to balance that with not too much. So I've done some research that, again, the same project with the lawyers that shows this. So the black line is working with a new member. So this is a team of lawyers that are from the same law firm working with a client that they had never worked with before. And this is exactly what you would expect. The innovativeness goes higher. And you compare this to a highly familiar member, a client that they've worked with over and over and over again, and the line just stays flat, so they're not particularly innovative. This is exactly what we'd expect. However, we also examine how does pressure affect these relationships. Pressure being, say you're in this startup, you're making those smartphones, you know there's lots of competitors, and you know that if you lose out to your competitors, your company's going to fail. So high consequences for failure is what we mean by pressure. So in those high pressure situations, who do you want to work with? So working with a new member actually has a negative effect. It goes from positive to negative. the difference between those two is significant. The negative effect alone isn't significant, but there's clearly a strong effect when you're working under high pressure. Working with new members is very detrimental. However, working with a highly familiar partner, someone who you trust, someone who you know very well, helps you reverse almost all of those effects. And they go from being flat and almost slightly negative to actually being more innovative. So this completely counters what we would normally expect to see. And so
So if you have a stressful project, put the older team members on it and let the new guys go home.
So it's not about age, it's about how many times you've worked together.
Well, yeah, but the newer team members are gonna have work less with the team.
Yeah.
So maybe they'd be less effective. That's what I'm getting.
Oh, so you're trying to explain why we see this?
Well, no, I'm saying if you're managing a team and you want it to be effective, if it's gonna be particularly high pressure, 2 weeks, like some crunch deadline.
Yeah.
The team members who've been around for a couple of years are gonna be better than the one, maybe.
I mean, there's certainly lots of conditions that you could explore, but that's what these data would suggest. I would probably advise that, yeah, because the biggest reason why this effect exists, at least in our data, is there's many reasons why familiarity helps reverse that effect, but the most important one is trust. And if your team members could work together for a long time, but if they don't trust each other, then you're going to have problems. Again, you can also have very new team members, and if everyone trusts that person very, very highly, they could be effective. So this is just kind of like a familiarity, and like the number of times you work with each other is a proxy for trust. But so there's ways to get trust without working together, but it's harder. Yeah, in the back.
So like the typical startup lasts like 5 to 6 years. How do you incorporate the fact that you peak after 2 to 3 years? Like you just churn your team over every 2 to 3 years? Like
yeah, you bring in new blood.
When you mentioned the performance effects, was that specifically in the stressful situation, or was that overall team performance over a longer period?
So yeah, this is so we don't have like the inverted U, like the negative U relationship, and what we're looking at snapshots of relationships. So in our data set, we have lots and lots of teams that have all collaborated with each other in some form. The ones that have collaborated with each other that were new were just developed. We're on the early part of that trend, and the ones that have worked with many times in the past were more reflective of the later part of the trend. That original data from the U looked at teams in an organization and looked at how their performance changed over time. So lots and lots of data. These are taking more like snapshots from like the beginning and end parts of those relationships. Yeah.
You mentioned that familiarity in this case is sort of proxy for trust. How did you come to that conclusion that was effective?
In the literature that I draw upon, that's a very well established finding that more familiar team members tend to have more trust.
Is that linear or?
I don't know. It's a good question.
I'm wondering if it follows that same curve. At first you don't trust people, then you trust them, then you get to know them long enough, you start getting suspicious.
There's been some early findings that would suggest a more complex relationship than linear. That it's and it can go in many things. I think in this context where you have organizations that are going back to the same lawyer that they've worked with in the past for a high pressure problem, there's a good chance they're picking that lawyer because they trust them to get the job done on this really important thing. I mean, these clients were in situations where if they failed to get a legal solution, they could be going bankrupt, or they could be losing millions of dollars. And in those kind of situations, I would guess that if you worked with this lawyer in the past, it's a very strong indicator that you trust them to get the job done. Okay, so I'm coming to the end here. Overall takeaways is when you're collaborating with other people, there's very tangible things between the two regarding the ideas that helps you be more innovative. And we see this is just becoming more of a common trend. You need to collaborate, and you need to work with other people. They have different perspectives, they have different sets of knowledge that helps you recombine those things into new things that are going to be more innovative. So you can recombine ideas, so in the form of lawyers coming up with new solutions to legal problems. You can also recombine expertise, knowledge, but you can also recombine different products and different components. And so a lot of the examples I was showing earlier are more examples of tangible engineering products that all of you are going to have expertise in some area of that space. And you can collaborate with other people who are experts in different types of components and products and recombine. And then there's also these intangible things that you can't see that are much harder to grasp, but they have a big effect. Things like conflict, familiarity, the ability to share knowledge, routines, communication. Just because the knowledge is present in the team doesn't mean that teams can take advantage of the knowledge. And so there's all these other aspects that I want you all to be thinking about now when you're working in teams or when you're working to develop your brilliant ideas, that these other things are going to affect how successful you are. And I think separating them into tangible and these intangible, unseeable things is like the useful way for me to think about it. So how to capitalize on your brilliant idea to help you go from the bottom. Sorry, apologies for the blurriness. I had to blow up a really small portion of the PDF to get this. But if you want to go from the bottom to these more breakthrough, highly radical, innovative successes, you need to master both these tangible and intangible aspects of working in a team. So that's